those of you that don't know me, my name is Laura, and today we're going to be discussing autism spectrum disorder within the Assyrian community. So a little bit about myself. I've been working with autism for 3 years, and I am a paraprofessional teacher's aide. And when I say I'm a teacher's aide, I don't mean that I'm making copies, laminating things, grading paperwork. I'm sitting, running rotations with these kids, teaching them reading, writing, math, science, all while trying to teach them how to focus and manage their behaviors. I am currently working with all ages. I work with all 220 of our students, and it is very, very difficult to memorize all the things that trigger them, all the things that are going to make them upset, but I absolutely love it. I am a respite and habilitation home care provider as well. Respite is kind of like babysitting these kids with the certification of working with autism, and habilitation is more like working on home goals with them. So teaching them morning and nighttime routines, teaching them how to do certain chores like loading the dishwasher, things like that. I'm currently working towards my bachelor's in psychology. I'll be graduating in a year. I'm so excited. And I do want to get my master's in behavior analysis because my end goal is to become a board-certified behavior analyst. So that is someone who creates and implements behavior plans for those kids that have more aggressive behaviors. So why is learning about autism important? These are the numbers today. So right now, autism covers about 1% of the world's population. That's 75 million individuals worldwide, and 5,400,000 of those individuals are just in the United States. That puts the United States at number 4 out of 195 countries. And the 3 countries ahead of us are all Middle Eastern. Now, why is this? Why is it highest in the Middle East? It's because we have limited awareness and limited healthcare access. Now, a very, very important thing to know about autism is that it is naturally higher in boys than it is girls. So for every 4 boys with autism, there is 1 girl. And the number that shocks me the most is that in 2021, there was 1 child with autism in every 44 children. And in 2023, just 2 years later, there is 1 child with autism in every 36 children. So you can see how much this number is increasing every year, every month, every day. It is very likely that every single one of you knows somebody that does have autism, which is why it's useful to learn about it. Now, autism and Assyrians. Right now, there is a very minimal amount of awareness and acceptance within our communities. And what I mean by this is, again, the parents that do have children that are diagnosed with autism either don't know what it is or they really, really don't accept it. I think all of you guys can agree with the fact that our parents have very, very high standards for us. So when something becomes a roadblock and stands in our way, it's very, very hard for them to accept. And this unfortunately is one of those things. But we do need to learn how to accept it, and we do need to make these parents more comfortable because that is what is going to get them to reach out to the proper resources in order to have their child grow. Just a few weeks ago, Mud Awa was at Mud Yosef in Arizona, and we have a kiddo out there that just got diagnosed with autism. He's 8 years old. And when he went up to take gurbana, he spit the gurbana out of his mouth, and everyone was staring at him like, oh my God, what's wrong with this kid? Well, he has autism. He has very, very high taste sensory. He didn't like the taste of it, and he doesn't understand the meaning behind it. Now, if the people within our churches understood what autism was, that wouldn't be a problem at all. They would move on from it. This is all stuff that we need to learn to make those families more comfortable so that they can continue to attend community events. We already are a minority. We need as many people a part of our communities as possible. And just because an individual has autism doesn't mean that they shouldn't feel accepted in our communities. Now, this was actually sent to me by someone in Chicago. Individuals with autism spend hours upon hours learning how to interact with others. Why don't we spend time learning to interact with them? When I say hours upon hours, I truly, truly mean that. These kids go to school for 8 hours a day. They spend their entire school day not only learning academics, but after school, they go to therapies, occupational therapies, speech therapies, behavior therapies, and even when they get home, it doesn't stop there. They're learning how to communicate with their parents, with their siblings, and they do this every single day. It's non-stop. It is naturally easier for us to learn how to adapt to them than for them to learn how to adapt to us. So why do we not take that first step in doing it? Now, what is autism spectrum disorder? Before we get into it, I do want to tell you guys some key terms. Depending on your relationship to these individuals, if you are a mom, dad, sibling, cousin, aunt, uncle, whatever it may be, you are probably okay with saying and hearing the word autistic. Learn from me, a lot of people do take offense to it because nowadays it is used more as a joke. So instead, try to say this person with autism or this person has autism. We also don't want to use normal or abnormal. Just because these kids are having atypical behaviors doesn't mean that they are not normal. And lastly, high or low functioning, it's not as much of an insult as so much as not making sense. Instead, you just want to specify their topics of strengths and weaknesses. We'll get more into it when we talk about what the autism spectrum actually looks like, but instead you can say this person is really, really high academically, or they're really, really low socially. Now let's get into it. So autism spectrum disorder is a developmental disability. It's compromised development, okay? And to simplify it, basically things that we really, really excel in, like socializing with peers, building relationships, communicating our emotions, those are very, very easy for us. It's very, very natural, but for them, it's very difficult and it takes a long time for them to learn. But things that we take very long to learn, things that we have to practice, like math, reading, art, whatever else it may be. Think about something that you struggle with. These are things that they excel in. But again, to simplify it for you guys, these kids have social deficits, communication deficits, repetitive behaviors, and fixated interests. So what I mean by social and communication deficits, that's the inability to engage socially or emotionally with others in a reciprocal way. So if I go up to one of my students and I say, "Good morning, how are you?" He's gonna say, "Good," and he's not gonna say anything else back. He doesn't have that wiring in his brain that says, "Oh, maybe I should ask how she's doing." He's unable to reciprocate those emotions for me. This also makes their peer relationships unable to be formed at a developmentally appropriate level. Again, they can't reciprocate those emotions, so it's difficult for them to make friends. But that's okay. To us, we feel bad for them. To them, it's completely normal. I see my students at recess, they play on the swings, they go down the slide, and they're completely okay with doing it alone. They don't care to play tag or do imaginary play like, "Oh, I'm Batman, you're Superman." They don't care for that stuff. Lastly, nonverbal behaviors are used. Again, we're gonna get more into that later. So repetitive behaviors and fixated interests, this revolves around their wants and needs. Motor mannerisms, speech, or use of objects are often repeated in stereotypical ways. Non-functional routines and rituals are inflexible. Now, non-functional routines, how I said earlier, when I'm doing habilitation home care and I'm teaching these kids morning routines, for us it's very natural. We wake up, we brush our teeth, we wash our face, we fix our hair. We want to look good for the world. For them, they don't care for it. So when I'm doing my home care, I'm trying to make this more of a habit for them, something that they're trying not so much to think about. It's just like an automatic body response because again, they don't have that wiring where they care for it. Rituals aren't flexible. Now by that I mean that these kids they have very, very strict schedules and they do not like change. If something changes in their day and they're not used to it, they are going to break down. It is very, very overwhelming for them. Abnormally intense or focused preoccupation with a pattern of interests. So these kiddos become very, very fixated on things that they want. I have a kid right now, he does all of his work in the color red. All of his stuff has to be the color red. And to me, I pick my battles. I'm not gonna argue with this kid because he wants to do all of this stuff in the color red, right? But when it becomes a problem is when I think about him having a job. and his boss not being okay with him doing everything in a big fat color red marker. So this is where you kind of have to teach them how to change those fixations. Their sensory input is often too much or too little. It is rarely just right. We're going to get more into that later as well. Autism is a spectrum disorder, meaning that every single individual with autism is different. This is what the spectrum looks like. So when I said earlier that high or low functioning doesn't make sense, that's because it is not linear. You don't have somebody that has more autism or less autism. Instead, it looks more like these pie charts. So imagine these are two separate individuals with autism. We have individual A and individual B. And we have all of these different categories. We have social skills, fixations, routines, sensory issues, stimming. Now, individual A, you can see, their sensory issues are at 9%, which means that they don't really have them. But individual B, it's much, much higher. Now, to put it into perspective for you guys, every single individual is a pie chart. And every single one of them has different percentages as well as different categories of interest. So, every single individual completely differs from the next. They are all different. Now, these are the fundamentals of autism. This is the most important stuff to me. 20 to 50% of individuals with autism are nonverbal or minimally verbal. Nonverbal means not involving or using speech to communicate at all. You will not hear a single word come out of these kids' mouths. They can make noises, they can sing, they can hum, they will not speak to you. Instead, in order to communicate, they use visuals, communication devices, sign language, or body language. Minimally verbal is a little bit different. These kids have difficulty with speech communication, which means that they can hold a full conversation with you, but you are not going to understand a single thing that they're saying. It's like they're speaking another language. And low speech communication is when they're saying very, very simple words. I have a kid right now, instead of saying, I'm hungry, or I need to go to the bathroom, he's going to say popcorn or potty, and that's all he's going to say. And I have to put that step in to try and figure out what this kid actually means. So again, those kids are going to use visuals and communication devices, but I really want you guys to understand that individuals that are nonverbal have the full capability of understanding you. The first time I worked with nonverbal kids, they really convinced me that whenever I talk to them, they don't understand me and they don't hear me, but don't let them fool you. They just want to ignore you. But yeah, they fully understand you. So nonverbal and minimally verbal does not mean that they cannot communicate. This is a perfect example of that. I was running a reading rotation, and this kid, in the middle of me reading, his iPad or his communication device went off and it said, I want 2 plain hot dogs with french fries and a lemonade, please. And I have yet to hear a word come out of this kid's mouth. But he was able to fully form a sentence on his communication device and communicate to me what he needed. Now, overstimulation, this is very, very important. Overstimulation is sensory overload, a state of being that is caused by too much sensory input. Being overstimulated occurs when one is overwhelmed by information from their senses and struggles to process their environment. So this pertains to the 5 senses, right? Again, like how I said earlier, they either have very, very high or low sensory input. And what are the 5 senses? That's sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch. So, if I have a kid that has really, really high sight sensory, things like lights flickering and stuff like that, that's going to distract him from engaging in the conversation that I'm having with him. Like how you saw in the first photo I had of one of my students, he has very, very high sound sensory. He wears headphones. Sound to him is very piercing to his ears. This microphone is like, he would go crazy over it. It's kind of like the feedback of a microphone where you're putting it very, very close to a speaker. The way that that's piercing to our ears, that's how sound is to him constantly, 100% of the time, which is why he wears the headphones. Smell sensory, their scent is very strong. Taste sensory, their taste can be very strong or very low. This has an effect on things that they eat. Sometimes if their taste is so high, things can taste so disgusting to them, they will eat the same foods their entire lives. I have a student that eats barbecue chips and pretzel sticks, and he's been eating that since, oh my god, I don't even know. Like, I have never seen him put another thing in his mouth. So typically these kids are in food therapies to help them to try different foods and to expand their taste buds. And touch, that's the last sense. So a lot of these kids, a lot of things can bother how they feel. I have a kid that will step out into the sun in Arizona and it's just too much for him to handle. He becomes very overstimulated and he'll scream and cry and say, my skin is burning. Things like tags for us, if they bother us, we're gonna itch our back and like kind of get over it. To them, they're not gonna be able to focus on anything until they solve that problem and until they cut that tag off. So when these kids are feeling overstimulated by this stuff, typically we give them sensory toys, which you've seen. I haven't been outside for almost all of our churches in the United States now, of things like this that'll help them focus in church if they're ever feeling overstimulated. Or you can give them sensory tools. These are things that are absolutely essential, like the headphones, weighted pads for anxiety, timers. Now, if none of these things are available, you'll see people asking them if they want a break, if they want to go for a walk, if they need squeezes, because sometimes they just like that pressure to calm them down. But again, if none of that is working, and there are those times, just give them space. They know how to go through their emotions alone sometimes. Stimming, this is my absolute favorite. I think it is so cool. So repetitive or unusual body movement or noises. A lot of the times you'll see these kids flapping their arms, flapping their hands, doing a lot of stuff with their fingers. They'll rock their bodies back and forth. They'll jump up and down. These are all things that they're doing to self-regulate when they are feeling overstimulated. There is something that is happening in their environment that you guys are not seeing. Something I noticed that I know my kids would notice is the lights were kind of flickering earlier. Now, if one of my students were here, they would become overstimulated by that and not be able to focus on it. Echolalia is also considered stimming. That is meaningless repetition of words. I call it scripting. So they can do this verbally or on their communication devices. If they're doing it on their devices, they're repeatedly pressing a button or making out a sentence. If they're doing it verbally, they're just, again, saying random stuff that they hear on TV shows, movies, stuff like that. I have a kid that comes into school, he'll start scripting an entire movie script at the beginning of the day, and by the end of the day, it's completely done. He said every single character's line, everything. Yes?
I heard stimming is not good, and then you have to read your right.
It is very true. A lot of the time I have to tell my students to stop scripting because it just gets them used to developing a behavior, and you don't want that for them. You don't want it to become a habit instead of self-regulating their emotions. Okay, so improving interaction. This is the last part of my lecture. This is probably the most important as well. So first, when you're communicating with them, first state their name, and then ask them whatever you want to ask, say whatever you want to say, but make sure they are paying attention. And if they're not, just repeat the process. Give them a touch on the shoulder, say their name again, make sure they're paying attention. Use simple phrasing, less is more. This is very, very hard with Assyrians. But if I'm sitting here talking to one of my students the same way I'm talking to you guys, they will turn around and walk away from me and not care because it's just too much for them to process. Pause to allow information processing and be patient. If I'm asking a kid at a picnic that has autism and I say, do you want kebab or shawarma? He's gonna sit there and he's gonna think, okay, this person asked me if I should eat kebab or shawarma. I kind of want kebab. Oh my gosh, that car on the street was pretty cool the other day. I love the color red. Oh wait, this person asked me this question. I think I want kebab. Okay, let's say it. To you, that's a whole long pause, but to them, so much is going on inside their brains in order to get that answer out for you. So again, just be patient with them. Structure your questions, give them options, like how I said earlier, kebab or shawarma. If I leave that open-ended, and if I say, what do you want to eat? They're gonna sit here and think about 1,000 different things that they can eat that you probably don't even have. So give them those options, make it simple for them. Be specific. Because of the fact that they can't reciprocate emotions, they answer things very, very, very quickly. Instead of just being broad and saying, how was your day? Try to say, oh, what did you like this about Bible study? Did you like what Romina said about this? Did it make you happy? Did it make you sad? And so on. Talk about their interests. Again, unable to reciprocate emotions, they just don't care what you guys like. That's how they are. They are so blunt, and they're only concerned about themselves. Yes?
I think it's important, like, for us to know that it's not more like an area of improvement instead of like we can. And also, I think some kids, like, it depends on who you're working with. And like I was sick with autism, and they can reciprocate like mine.
Yeah.
So like, if I walk in and I'm having a bad day, immediately he'll be like, "Are you okay?" So sometimes I think it just depends on the people that you're working with.
I agree with you, and that's because of the fact that they're all so different. So yeah, she is completely correct. Sometimes they are able to reciprocate those feelings, but again, it is also helpful if you are first interacting with them just to kind of talk about their interests, just so that you can develop a relationship with them and build that. You also want to be clear, avoid using irony, sarcasm, figurative language, and rhetorical questions. They will take it very literally. I can't tell you how many times I'm at work and I say, oh my gosh, I'm so tired, I'm gonna die, and they freak out and they think that I'm being serious. So instead, I have to sit there and explain to them, like, no, I just mean that I'm really, really tired. Okay? And then a trigger word, sometimes just be cautious of this, is no. They like things to be explained to them. They like to understand the why or why not. They also need a lot of positive reinforcement, which is the process of reinforcing or rewarding desirable behavior to increase the likeness that the behavior will be repeated in the future. So encourage typical behaviors. Again, if I'm talking to my student and I say, good morning, how are you? And he says, good, how are you? I'm going to say, oh my gosh, thank you so much for asking me how I'm doing today. That just made me so happy. So when he's out in the real world and somebody asks him how he's doing and he reciprocates that emotion, he's going to know that he's doing the right thing and the person isn't going to be confused by it. You also want to ignore irritating and attention-getting behavior. Teach them other ways to get your attention. Right now, if I was having a conversation with one of my coworkers and a kiddo came up to me, he'd be like, Miss Laura, Miss Laura, Miss Laura, Miss Laura, and I have to turn and explain like, hey, I'm in a conversation right now. I will get right to you when I'm finished. Please be patient. So teach them other ways to get your attention. Understand that they are blunt. Stay positive and resilient. They have trouble showing or expressing emotions and thoughts. So again, like I said, sometimes when you lose their attention, they'll just walk away from you, and to them it's very completely normal, but to us we're like, oh my god, that was so rude. But they just don't think about it in that same way that we do. Now, physical aggressions, a lot of the time when a kiddo is feeling overstimulated, they can have physical aggressions, but it is very rare that it will happen to you unless you're working with them constantly and pushing them constantly to the point where they can't take it anymore. So do not be intimidated. Sometimes you're seeing behaviors and you get very intimidated by them. They're not acting like typical kids, so you don't want to go up to them and interact with them. But understand that everything is trial and error. Be that person that has that first interaction. Practice makes perfect. The more you interact, the more confident you will feel while socializing with them. And lastly, believe. Really believe that you can be the change in these kids. I've seen it myself. I've seen kids do a complete 180 and change the person that they are. I've seen growth, and it's amazing. These kids have changed my life more than I can ever imagine changing theirs. That's all I have for you guys. If you have any questions, you can come up to me afterwards, take a photo of my number if you have anything private to ask me. That Autism Academy is for my parents and stuff in Arizona. That doesn't exist here, but again, there's my phone number if you guys have any questions. Thank you so much.